In question 3, we're going to, again, build the federal funds market and then show how the Fed targets interest rates. The numbers for the demand curve and the numbers for the supply curve have all been copied and pasted into Excel. Just like in problem 2, the intercept of the demand curve is the sum of C7, which is the shock parameter, plus the product of the reserve requirement ratio, 0.1, and checkable deposits, 521.5. So the intercept is 6.12. The slope is the aversion to holding excess reserves, 0.05. The vertical section is the sum of barred reserves, $0 billion, and non-barred reserves, $78 billion. The horizontal section of the supply curve is the discount rate, 3.22%. So down here we have the supply curve, which is this part of the dashed cross, and the horizontal section here. It's the L shape right here. The demand curve, and then the equilibrium is right here. I've copied and pasted the diagram from Cengage Now here into Excel. The supply curve is the L-shaped part of the dashed cross that starts at $78 billion, goes up until the discount rate of 3.22, and then goes right. The equilibrium federal funds rate is the interest rate at the intersection of demand and supply. The equilibrium federal funds rate is roughly 2.2%. Next, we want to actually calculate the equilibrium quantity of reserves, equilibrium federal funds rate, and the Fed's target for the federal funds rate. The equilibrium quantity is just 78. The target is 1 percentage point less than the discount rate. So if the discount rate is 3.22, the target is 2.22. The federal funds rate is determined by plugging the quantity of reserves into the demand for reserves. And that equals 2.22. So it looks like the federal funds rate is equal to its target of 2.22. Which of the following statements is true? The equilibrium federal funds rate is equal to its target. The federal funds market is in normal mode. That is true. So it's not in emergency mode and it's not in crisis mode. So it looks like A and B. A persistent recession caused demand deposits to shrink by $11.9 billion. With demand deposits now at 509.6, drive the new demand for reserves. So we're going to take this value and plug it into our Excel simulation. So the new demand curve has an intercept of 4.93 and the same slope. And it's shown down here in this diagram here. So this is the original demand curve for reserves, and this is the final demand for reserve. I'm going to copy and paste that into Excel. With the target at 2.22%, the federal funds rate looks like it dropped to 1.03%. The equilibrium quantity of reserves, I got to recognize that the quantity of reserves has not changed, $78 billion. The target is still 2.22. The federal funds rate, as Excel showed, is now 1.03. I'm plugging in the quantity of reserves into the new demand curve, and I get 1.03. I need to calculate the size of the open market sale. To get the federal funds rate back up to its target, we have to move the supply curve to the left. And when you move the supply curve to the left, the Fed, to do this, has to perform an open market sale. If the Fed performs an open market sale equal to this difference, it will raise the federal funds rate, which is now at 1.03, back up to its target. So we want to calculate the open market sale that is needed to raise the equilibrium federal funds rate back up to its target. To calculate this value here, We want the interest rate to be 2.22 because that's the target. And we want to know what the reserves are at that value. So we set the target 2.22 equal to the new demand curve 4.93 minus 0.05 R. So we have subtracted 2.22 from both sides of the equation and added 0.05 to both sides of the equation. Next, we divide both sides of the equation by 0.05. So the equilibrium quantity of reserves that are needed to push the federal funds rate back up to 2.22 is 54.2. So the open market sale is equal to the difference of 78 billion, this value here, and 54.2 billion. So the open market sale is $23.8 billion. If the excess reserves ratio is 12%, the currency ratio is 2%, and the reserve requirement ratio was 10%, which was given above, the money multiplier is what? Recall that the money multiplier in problem 1 of homework 6 was equal to 1 plus the currency ratio, C, which is 0.02 in this case, divided by the sum of the reserve requirement ratio, rho, which is 10% in this case. Now sometimes the reserve requirement ratio is denoted rho and sometimes it's denoted as RRR. So the currency ratio plus 1 divided by the reserve requirement ratio plus the excess reserve ratio, E, also known as ERR, plus the currency ratio, or which is also known as the currency drain. The money multiplier is the currency ratio or currency drain plus 1 divided by the reserve requirement ratio plus the excess reserves ratio and currency drain. So the money multiplier is 4.25. When we multiply this value by the open market sale, we get the change in the money supply. If the money supply decreases, we want to report it as a negative number. If it increases, we want to report it as a positive number. Since we had an open market sale, the change in reserves was negative, and we're going to report this number as a negative. The open market sale is 23.8 billion, but that represents a decrease in reserves. So we're going to multiply a negative 23.8 times the money multiplier. And we had a change in the money supply of negative $101.15 billion. In part C, the demand curve shifts back to black, so that raises the interest rate from 2.22 to 3.22, because now demand crosses the flat section of the supply curve. To lower the federal funds rate from 3.22 back to 2.22, we have to do an open market purchase. We have to undo what we did, and the open market purchase is $23.8 billion. So the open market purchase of $23.8 billion lowers the equilibrium federal funds rate to its target of 2.2%. If we multiply this value, the size of the open market purchase, by the money multiplier, we get $101.15 billion. Suppose checkable deposits fluctuate in a way that causes reserve demand to continue its balance about the red and black lines in question B's graph. To keep the federal funds rate at its target, the Fed must continuously conduct open market purchases and sales. Doing this causes oscillations in the money supply, which causes the nominal interest rate to fluctuate. Hence, the Fed can target the growth rate of money or interest rates, but not both. I'm going to check my work, and I should get everything correct, except for part E, which I leave up to you. And it looks like I do. Except for part E, of course.